boys and girls.
Hello, old man.
Into the mic.
Eat the mic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, in the mic.
Good. Okay, then I'll sit down and let everything else happen. Lenore Weiss will be reading first. As Joyce told you, she's had both a first novel and this first book of poetry, a late flowering of creation, which is always beautiful. It's beautiful when people achieve it. They get there at whatever stage of life. Now, this book is a life kind of a book. It's like a peacock's tail, and it reflects different aspects of a life, of experience. In some ways, it's like a clarion for revolution. In other ways, it's a right-on put down of America. There's a section called The Mauling, a man named Victor Grunig, which talks about the mauling of America, M-A-L-L, but it could also be M-A-U-L, the mauling of America. And that section has perfect shopping stereotypes. It nails it. There's also a child's fantasy. There's a grandma from Hungary who is both an appealing figure and in other angles like the Wicked Witch. There's a whole lot going on. It's a book that keeps reflecting different aspects. So let's give her a warm welcome, Lenore Weiss.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Poetry Flash. Thank you, Harold. And I'm greatly honored to read with Lee Rossi today. So, as Richard was saying, this is a book that each section is a different kind of reflection. When I started writing this, I thought, I've never really put down poems about my experience as a political activist, and I didn't want that time to be lost. So the first section reflects that, and then there was the mauling of America, and my fantasy was that I was going to travel all over the United States and visit as many malls as I possibly could, because malls really, they take over a neighborhood, they pour concrete over a history, over grave sites, over orchards. That didn't quite happen, so my visits were mostly based in the Bay Area. So you can read those. There's a section, more personal poems, and the last section are representative of a lot of prose poems. So I have a selection, I have a playlist that I put together, and I'm going to start with Magic Penny. And this actually was noted by the Benicia poetry group. It won an award one year in 2021. I felt very honored. It was their love contest. So this is called Magic Penny, and it's for my father. Hours on the beach he spent searching for pennies, dimes, quarters, for no other reason than to say, look what I found. And I could find a pretty penny too, if I kept my eyes open. We stood in a churn of clouds. I begged for him to tell me about his childhood, what his town was like, what his family was like, who his mother was. Nothing except how his history began after he'd stepped off the boat. I'd heard about violets growing in the old country with petals as large as ears, about a wicked witch who pushed villagers inside a stone oven and let them burn. For years I've searched for crumbs, never knew a scrap about those who came before. There had to be others who walked the shoreline of the ocean's mist. I wanted adhesiveness, a word that comes to mind, something that's hard to pull off without an ouch, to carry my father's strength forward like a magic penny. So my father was from Hungary. He came here when he was about 11 or 12. I have his papers that through Ellis Island. But, you know, that generation, because I've talked to other people who had similar backgrounds, never really shared much about what happened or who they were. And my parents died too early, so I didn't get to know them as an adult and ask those kinds of questions. So that poem was for my father. Next comes darkness simmers, despite what you might see today. Darkness simmers beneath my surface. I scrubbed each kitchen tile with vinegar, doused stainless steel appliances with cleaner to remove all streaks, lemon oiled the two halves of the dining room table and pushed them back together, dusted shelves until the microfiber cloth changed colors, gathered up garbage from all four corners and placed them at the door to take downstairs. Later, I remembered how I needed to get gas, postage, buy 3 limes, but I kept thinking how you reminded me of Gene Wilder. Your wild eyes, green and lashed, red hair spun by Rumpelstiltskin into barbed wires. Something primeval in the way you understood the world. A Willy Wonka who spoke, but did not speak, the same language as the rest of us yokels. So throw me a golden apple, a chili cheese pretzel dog, handouts from a drive-through window where black and white cats dance the tacomania. After hours, we'll meet at the Sweet Deal poker machine, and for one last time, place our bets, take our chances, sweep the swamp.
Doing it now.
Did you see that great picture about Trump on the wall? That's a classic. Anyways, here's the next, and this is, since it's despite everything that the weather has been doing, it is summer, and so I want to read this, and it's called Ode to a California Poppy. Some say you have 4 petals. I've counted 5, even 6. A ruffled pinwheel at your middle. Unabashed, you gather beneath mailboxes, telephone poles, and parking strips. squeezed into crevices, staking a claim, bursting onto the scene, golden like a movie star who got her first break in a spring production, laughing up and down Sunset Boulevard, a silken touch reminding me of a dress I once owned before I knew anything about you or California, backless and the same color as orange sherbet, flaring around my hips and making me feel like I was at the center of my own story. So this is a longer piece. You'll hear some repetition. It's not a mistake. Think of it as a chorus. And it's called A Sort of Time Travel Story. Where was that? Okay, I think I need a refresher. This is a longer one. A Sort of Time Travel Story. Gym time, I'm bombarded by 3 screens. One with news of Trump, a Michael S. coming to the Bay Area for a special somebody visit, columns of football scores, who's winning, loud music dressed in a special costume, a long lineup of earbuds, shopping at Fruitvale Farmer Joe's. A woman sells newspapers living in a hotel with her children and tells me that her husband's in jail. I believe for every drop of rain that falls. A man in the parking lot with a cardboard sign sees my newspaper and nods. A white-haired woman with a shopping cart reaches into the coin slot of a parking meter and comes up empty. Another woman in a wheelchair navigates the street with her chihuahua, moving over the white traffic lines with chugs of her feet. Paint from the street mural next to the Wells Fargo is flaking. Get me out of here. She always wanted to smoke, and so once did inside the cafeterias of cornbread and red beans, a burrow away from the paperweights of blue jellyfish. There, in the vacant lots of mica schist and chicory, took up residency inside an empty box. Her mother called over the clotheslines, "Come home!" After a turn, everything changed. She had tasted the freedom of stray dogs living between apartment buildings, went forth expecting no less. Always in a bittersweet half-life, wheeled on a gurney and waking up inside recovery rooms. Around the same period, she took up knitting. Growing green or falling to the ground, another leaf, my father's arch support store near Bellevue Hospital, changed into a fortune-telling storefront with an orange cat in the window. The vacant lot I used to play in as a kid, now 2-story units. Public school buildings go charter. A shoe store on the corner of Lake Merritt turned into successive reiterations of an Egghead software, gym equipment, Sprint, and now an LBTQ center. The steps of a dance studio leads to a Korean church. A kosher bakery dispenses hot wings. A political movement reconvened inside a motherboard. An anti-war movement marches parallel to another anti-war movement. A highway overpass serves as the roof for a tent city. Prompt. We all know about prompts as poets. I smell tobacco on my index finger, but I haven't smoked for years. She always wanted to smoke, and so once did inside the cafeterias of cornbread and red beans, a burrow away from the paperweights of blue jellyfish. There in the vacant lot of mica schist and chicory, took up residency inside an empty box. Her mother called over the clotheslines, "Come home." After a turn, everything changed. She had tasted the freedom of stray dogs, living between apartment buildings, went forth expecting no less, always in a bittersweet half-life, wheeled on a gurney and waking up inside recovery rooms. Around the same time she took up knitting. Smoking came later, a sweet smell of clove, But from whence did come this ode to Krakatoa, she really knew not, except it might have been a paramedical thing. But to be a member of a group, a girl whose knees podcasted from ripped jeans, not an object stamped by a neighborhood, a city, a state, a country as defined by Google property and inheritance. Into the annals and innards of dusty library books, she studied until she came up with a plan to travel outside of herself and timed it just right. A solar eclipse of the sun, whereupon everything lined up perfectly. Sparrows gathered on telephone wires as though they were waiting for a signal, a pass from the backcourt, and in one sliver of an instant covered the sky with the small blackness of wings. Into the sky's lining, she burrowed. No more prompting. Blue velvet smoke drew upon her like a curtain and then dissolved into an orgy of statues that stood around a fountain, fucking each other, water spewing from nipples and dicks with a constant orgasm of water flowing between a wood nymph's thighs. She pushed the falling hair from her face, took a long drink and sighed. Love was in the air. Where am I? She asked. A group of women and men paddled out to greet her. So, moving more on the subject of magic. So here is my prose poem about Houdini's cousin in the storage unit. She was moving from a 10 by 15 into a 5 by 9, downsizing whatever she'd packed into plastic boxes with seals that popped when I lifted them, as if they were filled with evanescent secrets, household remains, until she decided to make the pile smaller, so she gave stuff away. Not the piano, it was her husband's. He played. To people who kept driving up in cars until the pile was small enough to move to the second floor, where we stacked her stuff, me and Pee-wee, who had a stroke 6 months before, and Freddie, who bought Pee-wee $15 worth of gas that morning so he could get there. She said I was a real magician for getting her shit into one space, and I told her that's why a lot of people called me Houdini. And I wondered how he did those tricks, and she said she knew. Really, I said. Really, she said, because she was Houdini's cousin. Her father used to tell her it was all muscle control. He'd expand his chest when they chained him up, and after they dropped him into the river, he'd let out his breath and escape from the slack. That's what we all need to do. So 3 more. This one is called Oracle at the Car Dealership. At the Vantro car dealership in Monroe, Louisiana, where I bought my Toyota Camry, guys sat holding styrofoam cups and smoked cigarettes while a few of us do-si-doed around the parking lot, and I knew right away when I saw her, a sleek black 4-door with a moonroof, or maybe everyone called it a sunroof there. And the man who wrote up my paperwork had droopy pit bull eyes that made me want to sit down next to him. I was new to the area and asked how long he'd been selling cars. And he said long enough, but wanted to move closer to his mom's family. In Texas, or maybe he was going for surgery. I don't remember that part. Anyhow, he asked me about myself. And I told him how I'd recently moved from California to be with my boyfriend. And when his eyes got even sadder and sank down to his sideburns, said he used to have a girlfriend from California, but no more. She'd moved back to the coast. I asked what had happened. His girlfriend didn't like the area much. He really didn't know, but I knew he knew. And for a moment, I felt he was an oracle, sitting in a swivel chair behind a metal desk, explaining what my future would look like. Because even when there's a prodigious amount of love, shit happens. And now I realize why his eyes were so sad. Not because of him, but for me.
Oh, come on.
P.S. He was right. Okay, so let's see. So there's all this Oracle stuff, all this Grateful Dead stuff happening today, this weekend. So this is right here. So this is right here. So this is why I missed the Grateful Dead concert at the Oakland Coliseum. Any number of reasons, including how I'd arrived at the Lake Merritt BART station staring at crazy kids dressed in Mardi Gras feathers, beads, and tie-dyed everything, drifting happily in clouds of sweet-smelling smoke. I didn't have tickets, certainly not the right clothes, too late as I stood in the parking lot disparaging Dionysian maenads, wearing nose rings and lugging backpacks across the street to the Beaux-Arts auditorium, deadheads shedding flowers and getting high in the stands, smoking and dancing. I didn't know how to be that carefree. Remembered digging ditches in the baked limestone of Los Naranjos and collecting signatures at Union Square, swimming in the white mountains of New Hampshire with men and women who told stories about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. But as I stood there with my car keys, wondered how I'd found myself working at the Bank of America, writing documentation for ATMs, those new automatic teller machines. I don't know if any of you found yourself in that position, but I really would have loved to have gone there, but I was just in such another period of my life, and it was a total disconnect. But I got to know the Grateful Dead afterwards. Okay, so this is a new poem, and I'll end with that. So I am actually collaborating with another poet right now, so I'm not reading her part, but this is one of the last pieces of the collaboration that I've contributed, and it's called What Moves Me. For several days, a dead insect had been on the windowsill. Maybe it kept trying to escape, to find freedom, frustrated because the glass would not budge until it fell exhausted inside an empty toilet paper roll. By the time I saw it, the insect had been dead for several days. But it's not forgiveness I'm seeking. I had nothing to do with the glass or how the house was built. Every morning, guilt goes on clearance. These days, so many things make me feel helpless. In another time, I would have swatted the fly, not even thought about sweeping its crumbling wings into my hand and sprinkling them on the soil outside. But it troubled me, stayed with me like a lump in my breast, like the faces of Palestinian children floating before my eyes. This is not to compare people with insects. All life wants life. But children have become corpses, like the faces of concentration camp survivors on black and white film. The same starving faces, those same blank looks. This morning, a lone woman sat in protest on a park bench holding a handmade sign reading, "Cruel, barbaric." she wouldn't look at anyone who drove past.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Appreciate it.
Lenore Weiss. Okay, our next reader is Lee Rossi. And this book, Say Anything, is his 5th book of poetry. We've got another Wheelchair Samurai, a witty title, Wheelchair Samurai. Now, as Joyce told you, Lee is a contributing editor to Poetry Flash. He writes wonderful, smart, super smart reviews and interviews. And it's the same mind that's writing this book, but free of
Intelligence.
say anything. Free of literature.
Oh, that's not
Can be.
Now, he says early in this book, as an intro, said that he had felt urged that he needed to compete or contribute to what other writers were doing in politics and so forth. And Say Anything frees him. He finds himself in a mood of paradox and oxymoron. And the poems in this book are the poems of an agile, eclectic mind. He goes virtually everywhere, and everywhere he goes, he hits with that intelligence. So let's give him a warm welcome, Lee Rossi.
Thank you, Richard. As Monty Python would say, and now for something completely different. I don't think I have a poem today. I did a playlist for today, and I haven't done anything that relates to my book. Why do I do these things to my readers? Well, because I'm getting to the end of my. Thank you. There is that little devil that haunts all of us, right? Somebody's doing this in the back. Okay. Here's the thing. I went around all of California last year, reading from Say Anything, and I had a lot of fun. But I started to realize, well, fuck, Trump's in the White House again, and I don't know if I can do anything about that. But I did want to kind of position my work. And, it often happens with poetry that people don't delve into, the background of the poets, which may be a mistake. And I have a sort of varied, checkered kind of background, which I would like to share with you today. So you may notice that the political aspects of my life, I went from the Catholic Church to dialectical materialism. That was my second religion, dialectical materialism. And from there, I went to Buddhism, and but you'll get some of that, as I tell you a little bit more. I read poems about my background. You might have encountered a New York Times essay several months ago by a black writer who said she was fucking tired of, going out and demonstrating on behalf of all the other people who were oppressed. And she was going to let white folks take over, moving into the streets. Or as Joanne Reed said, "You made this mess, now fix it." So here is my answer, my response to that. Question you might ask yourself: how did I, a white boy from the Catholic provincial retrograde suburbs of St. Louis, become an ardent supporter of black rights, the rights of women, of Asian Americans, immigrants, people of non-conforming sexuality? I think we know some of those. I don't think there's any simple answer, but these poems might give you a few ideas. My first few poems grow out of my childhood in the suburbs of St. Louis, godforsaken place, during the 1950s, part of the first generation of white flight. Of course, it was also the heyday of the Cold War, and the first poem meditates on that alarming circumstance. It's called 1955, 12 Miles from Ground Zero. We didn't have much education, 8 grades for mom and dad, even fewer for me, but we read all the time. The Daily Globe, Time, and US News. Every week, another article about the nuclear threat. With Russia only 30 minutes over the horizon, we'd have almost no warning before 50 megatons vaporized downtown. And with downtown only 12 miles away, who knew if we'd be vapored too? I knew, of course, having studied the diagrams, downtown the center of the target, and concentric rings spreading out into the city and suburbs, the houses, parks, grass, and trees, the animals and pets, the schools filled with thoughtful children. We'd survive, I decided, radioactive perhaps, glowing with a plutonium tan, but only if the Russians could hit what they were aiming at. In the meantime, I checked our fruit cellar, the jars of pickles and peach preserves, rank on rank, what we'd have to eat and drink after the firestorm. Okay, that was 1955. Ooh, lovely dog. And suddenly, it was 1956, the year of the Hungarian Revolution. And I'm still in the white suburbs of Missouri. But later, I enrolled at Cornell University. This is for Richard, among whose famous habitués were Thomas Pynchon, the novelist, and Vladimir Nabokov, refugee, novelist, and butterfly enthusiast. This poem is called Born Too Late, or The Rise and Fall of American Bandstand. Any of you remember American Bandstand? Oh, I loved American Bandstand. Pynchon was 16 when he entered Cornell. Can you imagine? It was 1953, the Korean War suddenly over, Mr. Potato Head still big with kids. I spent hours Christmas morning building an aircraft carrier, flying its 3 tiny planes on sorties over the Korean peninsula, bombing bridges, strafing commies. 2 years later, Pynchon was in the Navy, and then in '56 on board a destroyer heading for Suez. I was out back tossing clods of dirt at the chicken house, like the freedom fighters in Budapest. The next year, Pynchon was back at Cornell, uphill from Ithaca Gun, studying Russian literature with a famous Russian emigre, a literary assassin stalking American Puritanism, voluptuous and blonde. That man's father murdered by another Russian emigre. Nabokov always said he didn't remember the kid, but Vera, his wife, did. The kid's funny writing, half script, half print. I was sitting in our living room, like one of Plato's cave dwellers, letting shadows wash over me, lip syncing like the singers on Bandstand. Philadelphia, the friendly place, was more real than my own backyard. And then Pynchon, descendant of the founder of Springfield, Mass., Armory of the Union, graduated. Later, he wrote, "If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers." The lepidopterist was gone too, who'd written, "You can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style." I'd get there a few years later. Meantime, I'd learned to dance like they did in Philly. But folk music had just arrived, and soon I was sitting at a tiny table, sipping a Coke, tapping my foot, almost ready to march against the next war. Before I knew it, I was an adolescent and had to choose a high school. And being Catholic and knowing that my immortal soul would be in constant peril if I went to a co-ed school, I chose the all-male seminary. This next poem recounts one particular outing with a group of fellow semis during the 1964 presidential campaign when we went to hear the Republican candidate for president. Do you remember him? Goldwater. It's called Young Americans for Freedom. There we were, 4 or 5 seminarians in the back of the auditorium, almost spilling over the lip of the mezzanine, waiting for the man of the moment to appear. He was a Jew, and we his sworn enemies. Politics makes strange bedfellows, that's what I was told. And before we'd lose our country to godless communists, we'd make allies of the devil and his spawn. That sounded okay to me, although I never met an atheist, much less a communist. The devil, however, was a familiar, a constant companion, always urging me to take another path, constantly pointing out how narrow the high wire I trod, how deep the drop. I stared at the hats, the nets, the bald spots below me. The music crescendoed, and there he was, the senator from Arizona, polished, patrician, silver hair, tribune of the gainfully retired, refugees from the snow belt, its frostbite and cinders. We are surrounded by enemies, he told us, not just in Asia and Europe, but in our own country. People who would take our homes and businesses, take away our beliefs, troublemakers who wanted to sit next to us at lunch counters, who would force us to accept them as equals. Freedom is a gift we have to protect from those jealous of our freedoms. I'd learned enough about the virtue of selfishness to know that taxes are bad, that government saps your moral strength, Delilah clipping Samson's hair. We've been taught to look in the mirror and see Satan. We had so many names for evil: beatniks and homosexuals, secularism and civil rights, the UN, the Federal Reserve. So many lions, so few Daniels. Water cannons and police dogs weren't enough. Not riot police, nor even Bull Connor spitting into a bullhorn. When would we realize that all our weapons would never save us? Not until we declared war on America. So there was war everywhere I looked when I was a kid. And the next war was already underway. It had a number of names. The Second Indo-Chinese War, the Resistance War against America, or simply, as I do it, Vietnam. I guess there were other names. Happily, I was a spectator in that war, superbly positioned to watch its desperate ending. A couple of months ago, May 4th to be exact, was the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. Here's a poem which recounts that fateful day, along with an unusual amount of turmoil in my own private life. It's called May Day, 1975. Somewhere, one war was ending, helicopters rising from the roofs of buildings and spilling refugees like loose change, while another war was blindly chipping away at its prison with an egg tooth. I was half a world away, sitting in the Schlosspark and hoping for a visit from one of Rilke's angels. Despite its name, there was no castle, only a blank space in the middle of the city, all that was left for the children of the firestorm. I watched shoppers hurrying like Aeneas into Hades and resurfacing from a cavernous underground grocery with the heads of Demeter and Eurydice in string bags. I wondered what the sudden beauty of the sky, clouds like bolsters and feather beds lazing on a mattress all watery blue, had to do with the uncharacteristic optimism flooding me like snow melt. Somewhere it was still winter, the wind's serrated teeth gnawing granite and gneiss, but here the cherry trees unfurled their fragrant labia. And then across the vast green, I saw a friend. He was drunk and depleted, a soldier who'd emptied his clip into the jungle, frightened by something he couldn't see. I could go home now and find my wife alone for the first time in days. I had given away something I didn't want and now would have to take it back. But I waited. Every spring, or every year rather, spring arrives with its promise of less. I waited for the angel to appear, waited until the nimbus surrounding everything faded, and I was free to step into a future that even then was becoming my past. Alrighty. I don't know if I'm running out of time. I feel like I'm running out of energy.
You're good.
Okay. So, I grew up in St. Louis, but my father grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was, well, there aren't too many Italian Americans, and at least then are not, maybe there are now, you know. They're all products of mixed marriages, you know. Yeah. Italians like to marry those blonde Southern girls. Anyway. So, what can I tell you? St. Louis was a slave state. You remember that, Missouri Compromise. And it also invented residential segregation, what we know as redlining, right? Memphis, on the other hand, was a cotton metropolis, the place where my father was born and fled from when he was 13 years old. In those days, being Italian was almost as bad as being African. But every summer we'd go back to Memphis to visit family. And one summer I spent a couple of weeks at my uncle Alex's farm. So I call this poem Parable of the Mules, which makes it sound a bit biblical, but everything in the South sounds a bit biblical. Read Faulkner, okay? Parable of the Mules. We were walking past the corral when all of a sudden my uncle says, "It ain't right." There was a stallion in the corral. My uncle called it the paddock, and the stallion was showing off. It was hot, hotter than I was used to. Cotton was ready, and the pond was green with scum. Most of the time I'd been there, a couple of weeks during summer vacation, he was just an old horse. But today, he was a stallion. I could hear the mares on the other side of the barn sounding nervous. "What ain't right?" I asked. "Miscegenation," he says, almost spelling it out. I was 11 or 12, and not very sophisticated, but I figured he wasn't talking or just talking about a horse. "You know what I'm talking about," he says. So I nodded and hoped that whatever it was, he'd just drop it. But of course, I wouldn't be telling this story if he had. "Them nigras," he said, using a word that because I was from up north made me nervous. It's really their fault. A white boy can start going with a colored gal, and pretty soon they're miscegenating. Now, I didn't know much, but I knew that that wasn't what people usually called it. You're almost grown, he said, and pretty soon you'll want to be going out with girls. Not me, I thought, but didn't know how to say that. So stay away from them colored gals, he said. But before I could even ask why, or begin to suggest that maybe there might not be anything wrong with dating someone from another race, he said, it's like horses. Horses and zebras. Horses and zebras don't mix. Horses is domestic animals and zebras is wild. And there's always something wrong with the offspring. I didn't know what to say, of course. Maybe when I studied biology. At any rate, I figured this was an important piece of my education, something I want to come back and chew on from time to time. But by then we were back at the barn where he kept his prize mules. They were big, big as horses, and black. And he warned me not to go near them. No carrots, no sugar lumps, not even a pat on the nose. They're mean, them mules, but they'll plow a field when it's too hot for a horse. I'm not sure whether the mules appreciated that kind of praise. They just stood there and didn't make a sound. Okay, so this, I guess, is my 3-poem warning. I usually give a 2-poem warning, but since you gave a 3-poem warning, I'm going to do it too. Okay. So, time to jump into the way, way back machine. You remember Mr. Peabody, I hope. Here's a poem that tries to imagine what it was like for my grandfather, my paternal Italian grandfather, as a young lad growing up in the hills of northern Italy at a time when the newly formed Italian nation was trying, like every other European nation, to build an African empire. This was before he emigrated to the US, which is another story. It's called A Wooden Gun. They gave me a wooden gun and taught me to shoot, though I already knew how. They taught me the sight along the barrel, although I could kill a rabbit at 50 yards. They taught me to brace my elbow against my side for stability, just like my father had taught me when I was 10. They taught me to squeeze the trigger slowly and pretend that I felt a recoil. They taught me to pretend that I could see blood blossom on a target. They taught me to march, putting my left foot in front of my right and then the right in front of the left, just as I had done since I learned to walk. They taught me to dig a hole and put my shit in it. They taught me to dig a deeper hole and put myself into it. They taught me to pretend that I could hear an incoming artillery shell and duck my head in time. They taught me to salute and say, "Yes, Sergeant." I said, "Yes, Sergeant," louder and more quickly than anyone else in the platoon. They taught me to fold my kit and make my bed so tight the sergeant could bounce a quarter off it as if it were a trampoline for quarters. They taught me to polish my shoes, to spit and polish until they gleamed like a cloudless night high in the mountains. They taught me not to think, but to obey. Yes, Sergeant. Yes, Colonel. Yes, Papa. Yes, Prime Minister. I was just a boy, but I was a good student. All right. Well, my father had his own military experience, you know. I didn't, thankfully. Eventually, I made it to California, the Gold Mountain, but long after my dad had been here many times in WW2, the big one. He traveled a lot between Texas, where he was a drill instructor, and Oakland, California, where the freshest cannon fodder was shipped off to the Pacific War. On his way back to Texas, he'd strap on his service revolver and escort Japanese Americans to a concentration camp in Texas. This next poem is a request for forgiveness from my father. The ultimate family adventure. Are you ready for a change of pace? When was the last time your family experienced something truly different? Just one BART stop from SFO, nestled at the foot of majestic Mount San Bruno, Camp Rising Sun for the whole family. Once upon a time, it was Tan Foran Racetrack, and later the Tan Foran Assembly Center, home to thousands of Japanese Americans. Now your friends at the friendliest camp on the peninsula are making it possible for you to experience the full range of activities available only to people of Japanese descent during World War II. Wake with the sunrise, sleep when the sun goes down. Camp Rising Sun offers an experience of history unlike any on the West Coast. Those of you who've lived in Monticello's slave quarters and worked its fields know how thrilling a change of pace can be. CRS offers authentic meals, rice, twice daily, sprinkled with seaweed and hot ocha, green tea, and classes in traditional arts. Become adept at sumie, calligraphy, and ikebana, flower arranging. But first, you'll be clearing debris discarded by your fellow vacationers. And for the more robust, opportunities to demonstrate your construction skills, building roads and walkways. You'll love squeezing the whole family, all 6 of you, into a stall in one of our converted stables. Everyone gets their own straw tick and blanket. A memorable night is promised for all. Life at Camp Rising Sun reminds you you're never far from nature. The smell of horse manure, the whitewashed corpses of insects offering texture to the hastily erected walls. Younger folks can take classes in karate and learn to grow vegetables. As is usually the case, there are more latrines for men than women. In fact, men can choose between facilities for gents and colored gents. Camp Rising Sun goes out of its way to offer historical accuracy. The guards' uniforms, in an interesting historical twist, the guards are all descendants of the original internees. Their uniforms authentically reproduce military police gear. Be aware that as in the original camp, hot water runs out by 9 in the morning. Those who need to do laundry should get up by 3 a.m. There's a dawn to dusk curfew, which is mostly observed in violation. Be sure to enjoy North Lake, a fish pond designed and built by the earliest generation of campers. Don't worry about having time on your hands. The Army Corps of Engineers has left plenty for you to do. And yet you'll love the leisurely pace of camp life, the long, slow-moving lines for the latrines, the showers, and the mess. You'll want to come back year after year. Okay, and my last poem. I actually did some research for that poem, you know. Something I avoid like the plague, but all right, last poem. God, my voice is going. Last poem. Well, I'm drinking the water, but it's not doing me any good. I'm just overwrought, shall we say. It happens to people who live under stress, you know. I'm going to live a shorter life because of Donald Trump, you know. I'm not happy about that. Okay, my last poem is a survey of the current social and political situation, but it could just as well be a description of any moment in the past 79 years, to say the entire length of my life. The title is the first word of the poem. It's the only economical title in the bunch. Dystopia is what's left after the Great Flood. That and promise. The bodies of the drowned littering the beach, which is everything. Have you prayed for sunshine? Do you remember the name of that flower? Red, 5-petaled, with prickles instead of thorns, that used to greet you each morning as you rose from your bed. Whose plant are you? What soil awaits your return? An island with its queen? An ungainly boy who only looks like you and answers to the name of Telemachus? Who will imagine your return? You who have destroyed that possibility, raising cities, fouling the sky with your boasts. The dead will not sing your name, but will flee into the rivers, into the soil. You wanted peace, you said, the peace of a forest at midnight when wolves and lions stalk the unwary. And now even the wolves, the lions are gone. You're doing, fording the rivers, leaping the hills, finding enemies wherever you went. This is your victory, this mud of which you are made. Thank you. And thank you for coming out. Great.